The opportunity to address a local audience for a change. I usually go around the state and even different parts of the country to talk about issues of growth management and land use and smart growth. I guess people outside see that I serve with sort of a conservative libertarian bent and what amounts to a petri dish of smart growth, so they like to hear what I have to say and the perspective I bring, and I hope you'll appreciate it too. When I talk about the prospect for prosperity, because we're really talking about what the future looks like in our community. And just a little bit about the American Dream Coalition. That's the group I'm speaking on behalf of. It was founded in 2002, which, by the way, is when I entered office. And it's a nonprofit 501c3 organization. And we have a website I encourage you to check out when you can, AmericanDreamCoalition.org, all one word. We have a blog, and we have the ADC Communicator, which is pretty much a bi-monthly compilation of urban and suburban policy-related news so that you can see what else is going on around the country. In fact, it's been an eye-opener for me to see how much commonality you find all around the state and around the country. Well, there's the handsome devil himself, remembering when I served 2 terms as the Gainesville City Commissioner, and oftentimes I would do my best to persuade the audience and only had marginal success. Hope I'll have more success today. I did have exceptional service in office. As you know, once you're elected office, anything that happens on your watch you get to take credit for. So back when I represented the city of Gainesville, we brought home the brass. And since I left office, it hasn't been the same since. Nowadays, I spend most of the time talking on the radio with Jake Fuller. But we're here to talk about growth, okay? And what we want to do is talk about, first we need to understand what I call the dominant paradigm, okay? You can find that in many of the reports that Alachua County and City of Gainesville have. This is the year 2035 Livable Community Reinvestment Plan adopted by the MTPO, and which Jerry talked about. Basically, we're projecting 70,000 new people by the year 2035. Hopefully about 50,000 jobs are going to come with that. So the question is, what are we going to do with everybody? And so what in the world? All right, now we got to go all the way back. Yeah, I brought my clicky thing. We have to. I have my own. Brandon, will you hand me my clicker over there? Might be a little bit better than this. This one is sticking, it looks like. Well, anyway, to get to it, to deal with all of these new people, what we're saying is, we're going to have to integrate land use and multimodal transportation strategies, and in doing so, we're going to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, future land use, housing, and transportation elements. I think we have every right to question the veracity of these claims. What is the dominant paradigm? Well, we are a smart growth community. If you go to either City of Gainesville, Alachua County's websites, you see the associations that have significant influence over our planning culture. And in fact, you look at the vision statement, first thing, the top priority is to stop sprawl and encourage higher density infill in our community. So what's in the name? You know, it's smart growth is the one that I use most often, but we see different things, and there are variations between them, but new urbanism, compact cities, resilient cities, livable communities, because evidently no one lived in anything livable prior to mixed use, high density, transit-oriented development. Everything was deadable. Growth managed, but it all comes down to these are growth management policies and sustainable development. Now, I have a theory that, based on current trends, that the way sustainable has become a buzzword, by the year 2036, by the year 2061, we'll be using the word sustainable at least once in every sentence, and that by the year 2100, every sentence will simply be the word sustainable repeated over and over again. That's the direction we're going in. But what does it mean? Well, actually, the definition that most people in the planning community defer to is from the United Nations World Commission on Environment and Development, meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. At a visceral level, that sounds fine. Of course, the question is always, how do we know what the future generations need? It essentially requires a static assumption about what we have today and makes no allowance for technologies. If you look at what we projected home computers to look like 50 years ago, we simply wouldn't have housing big enough to accommodate the home computer. And there's many technologies we simply wouldn't have considered. To do this, so basically, organizations encourage long-term, long-range planning horizon. Thousand Friends of Florida, big advocacy group, worries that if we don't have stringent growth management regulation by the year 2060, we're going to be in a heap of trouble. They have presented illustrations accepted by the Department of Community Affairs when it existed that showed, this is the development in Florida now, and this is what's going to happen in 2060 if we don't find a way to stop sprawl. And that's pretty scary. I'm raising a whole brood of kids here in this community, so that's something I don't want any more than anyone else. But the problem is, we're trying to stop this from happening, but the reality is this is not happening. When you get away from the advocacy organization, you look at something like this, the U.S. Geological Survey's, their development imprint, what you see is that Florida has had development, in the 400 years since the Spaniards arrived, but it's just not as dramatic as people and those who advocate for smart growth would like you to believe. What's interesting is I was up in Maryland, and I spoke to, they actually have a Secretary of Planning statewide, and of course they have a statewide growth management plan called Plan Maryland, and I was addressing a group of officials, including the Planning Secretary, and I couldn't help but notice that in their document, they use the same software. And so I'll leave it to you to draw your own conclusions, but it tells me a lot about those who advocate more stringent growth management regulations, the extent they'll go to try and scare the citizens from which we're supposed to derive our authority, in which we, advocate these things. Smart growth sounds pretty reasonable, So if you just go to Smart Growth America, we just want to invest time, attention, and resources to restore communities. And of course, the formula, repeated everywhere, higher densities, mixed use, compact development, transit orientation, urban infill. It's always presented, this is how we preserve our unique sense of place, but we're going to do the same formula everywhere. And if you look through the planning documents, Lockyer County's comprehensive plan, you see the diversified transportation, compact mixed use, densities and intensities, and a community without the need for the automobile. Gainesville's comprehensive plan, the same. Quick word, most of you in this audience probably know that last year the state of Florida eliminated the Department of Community Affairs. And so the statewide growth management policies are largely gone, but local communities can continue to opt in. Lockyer County and Gainesville is no different. They call them the EARs, Evaluation and Appraisal Reports, these 10-year comprehensive plans. And from my perspective, a closer look at the EAR is not a pretty sight. What do smart growth regulations? Well, actually, interestingly enough, the academic and independent literature is pretty crystal clear, but even the planning literature, if you look at the cost of sprawl, which was released 2000 and updated in 2003, they indicate that smart growth regulations, whereas they still advocate them, can have these effects. Increased underlying land costs, increased planning costs, increased construction costs, increased financing costs, encourage the building of high-end homes, encourage land banking and housing speculation. Now, most of us know that policy is about trade-offs. Do the costs outweigh the benefits? What is disappointing in this community is oftentimes we'll have all of this conversation about growth management and we will never recognize the trade-offs. We just pretend they simply don't exist. And as a respect to the citizens who are technically our bosses at a minimum, we should have that conversation without fear. Even HUD, Why Not Our Community, came out and they talked about the barriers to affordable housing, complexity of environmental regulations, impact fee expansion, urban barriers such as growth boundaries, what we want to call the emerald necklace in this community. And what they say is the misuse of smart growth, I'd argue, is the the correct application of smart growth, that it has these effects. The 8th Annual Demographia International Housing Affordability Survey takes a very big picture, 325 world markets, and they look at the prescriptive housing markets versus responsive housing markets, and you can see the effect on affordability. They use an internationally respected metric, the median multiple. That is the median price of a house divided by the median household income to determine affordability. A ratio of 3 is what's considered to be affordable. Ratios above 3 are unaffordable markets, less are affordable markets. And you can't really see them very well here, but what you see is a lot of the responsive markets that you might call the usual suspects: Indianapolis, Dallas, Kansas City. If you remember, Google chose to go to Kansas City over many of the smart growth cities, including Gainesville, to expand their fiber network, and they cited specifically easy to get business done there. Whereas you see Portland and Seattle and New York, Boston, San Francisco, many other less responsive markets have made housing unaffordable. Of course, that was before the bubble burst, so it's worth talking about bubbles. The academic literature is crystal clear. There's really no dissent that supply constraints in the housing market amplify the boom-bust consequences of the subprime expansion in the mortgage market. We in Florida suffered terribly from the bubble bursting, and so it's natural to think everyone suffered. And of course, there were federal financial instruments that made the consequences pretty much similar all around. However, it's very important to point out that the bubble itself did not happen uniformly across the country. In fact, you can see when you look at mortgage delinquency by county, they are concentrated mostly in states that had statewide growth management laws or metropolitan areas that were known for stringent land use regulation. It was not uniform. Its impact has been uniform, taking down our economy, but it's the actual land use regulations themselves haven't. What are some of the other trade-offs? Well, again, if you look at many of the smart growth communities that we in our community like to emulate, there's chronic underemployment. Portland has actually a moniker as the city where young people go to retire. And declining minority population. San Francisco opened up its own office for African American out-migration. And they're not alone. Portland, Seattle have all recently dealt with the people fleeing away from their metropolitan areas, particularly low-income and minority individuals. Fewer minority-owned businesses, less family formation, higher transit dependency. Speaking of Portland, this is their own forecast. I like to use their data instead, so you can't say, well, that's just your opinion. Well, actually, it's their data. What Portland shows is that they are projecting a significant drop in enrollment for kids in their school system. And I just like to point out that Portland, the city that is very much emulated here, actually had more kids enrolled in their school system in 1927 than they do today. So we get the city we want, and some of us are sitting there saying, well, it's not the city that would welcome people who want to raise families necessarily. We always say it does. So anyway, the dominant paradigm, when we talk about sustainability, smart growth, livability, what it really comes down to is we're talking about higher densities and transit orientation. So I want to take a few minutes to talk about that. Alachua County's comprehensive plan, we talk about dwelling units per space. Of course, when we get a sort of a picture of what density looks like, we always think of people per square mile. We think of City of Gainesville, we have about 2,000, 2,100 persons per square mile. And then San Francisco's at about 5,500, Portland's around 4,000. So we think of that. But in the planning documents, we only talk about dwelling units per acre, so it's important to convert that. Medium, high density, 9 to 14 dwelling units per acre, high density. But of course, there are 640 acres in a square mile, so we're really talking about 5,700 dwelling units per square acre for medium, high, 8,900 dwelling units per acre for high density. But according to the 2010 census, there are 2.19 persons per dwelling in Alachua County. So what that actually means, to get a sense of what the Alachua County future land use element hopes for, is that medium high density will be 12,600 people per square mile. High density will be 19. Now, of course, that's not going to cover every square inch of Alachua County, but it is the concentration of infill and development. That's what those in power would like us, the direction they'd like us to move in. And they think the reason why is because you got to have significant density levels in order to make transit work. Bottom line is transit will work only if the alternative is worse. And of course, we currently have a pretty successful bus system right now for the population it serves. But what we're hoping to do is graduate to bus rapid transit. These are articulated buses, much more expensive, much larger, much less fuel efficiency per mile than a regular bus. Plan East Gainesville, we've always talked about, we've neglected East Gainesville. We've got to do something for East Gainesville. So I thought this would be very illuminating for you to know. If you look at the Plan East Gainesville document, they're saying, the cornerstone of the transportation plan is a bus rapid transit service. And then you show these corridors we talk about, Walter Road and Hawthorne Road. But what is interesting to know that there's a difference between the rhetoric and the reality is that if you look at the bus rapid transit ridership analysis produced by RTS owned document, they're saying that you have a present ridership of this, and that by the year 2035, with bus rapid transit, they'll go to that. So before we talk about the new transportation system, you have to look at what we currently have, because the justification of it shouldn't be what the final number looks like, but what the enhanced number is. What are we doing above what we already are doing? And that's whether or not we justify the expenditures. According to the bus rapid transit ridership analysis, the enhanced value is that we will add 21 new riders to the Waldo Road corridor. We'll add just 10 new riders to the Hawthorne Road corridor, and it will only come at a cost of $20 million to do that. The dollar numbers come from the year 2035 cost feasibility plan. And again, this is the study, Gainesville Regional Transit. I encourage everyone to go to it. It's Table 5.4 in the Regional Transit System's own study. These are the most highly used utilized corridors, Archer Road, University Avenue. You see the present ridership numbers, that's actual riders. They always translate it into the passenger miles, because then you can essentially double, quintuple, and the numbers look much larger. But that is their numbers, the actual ridership. With bus rapid transit, we will go to that. Okay, so the total ridership estimate 16,000. Spending lots of money on bus rapid transit, we hope to get 3,800 more people. That would come at a build-out cost of $369 million, according to the year 25 cost feasibility plan. And keep this in mind, all of these routes they're taking over existing transit routes. Who are going to be the new riders? It's not likely that you're going to get cars off the road, but more likely you're going to get pedestrians off the sidewalk. When you look at the feasibility study again, folks, daily trips, by year 2035, and we're just going to look at Archer Road just as one example. 6 lanes as we now know, 3 one way, 3 the other, right? Okay, we're projecting this growth here at 900 new transit riders, yet the population is still growing in our community. So that means the difference is we're going to end up by 2035 with 121,900 trips going through the Archer Road corridor daily on 6 lanes. But the bus rapid transit plans calls those for 2 of those to be dedicated, reducing it to 4. So therefore, without dedicated bus rapid transit, by the year 2035, we're going to try to push 20,300 new trips per day through that per lane through the corridor. But if we take 2 out of general purpose use, we're going to push 30,400 trips per lane through the Archer Road corridor. Washoe County's comprehensive plans make clear there's not a road widening strategy that they will accept. So what we're getting is a 60% increase in traffic per lane. That is called congestion by design, congestion by intent. And folks, it'll simply have, 940 new riders absolutely will have no effect on traffic congestion. Again, you're not getting cars off the road, you're getting pedestrians off of the sidewalk. And so what are the transit market share? Well, again, we throw out these numbers that really, get us confused. Well, we got 10 million trips or whatever. Well, actually, the 2010 census, hot off the press, looked at means of transportation to work. The Gainesville urban area, 5.6, which again is good when you compare it to a lot of those cities we say we need to look like. Charlotte has light rail. We got to be like Charlotte. Why? We would actually decline in transit ridership. Oh, but they have higher density. Okay, Eugene, Oregon has bus rapid transit. Yeah, but we would actually decline. But see, they also have higher density. Madison, well, they're a little bit better than us, but they also have higher density. And of course, there's the mecca of smart growth, Portland, that itself is nothing really to brag about when you think about it, but they have much higher density. If you want to get significant transit ridership, you have to have mega densities, which I frankly don't think our community actually wants to do. The New York metropolitan area has 40% transit market share. It's huge, but it also skews the table for everyone else. If you look at the other wannabes, Boston, Chicago, San Francisco should be in there. They're above 10%. But most major metropolitan areas are beneath 10%. And even in the planning documents, if you get all the way back to page 420, you'll see that actually they kind of acknowledge that transit has a limited role to play in the community, 5%. But again, we're not anything new. So the point is, we're hoping our future hinges on a massive investment in mass transit to really transform how we travel. But folks, they even acknowledge it's not going to change all that much. And of course, that's a nationwide picture. So then they say, well, transit will bring economic development. And that's currently the argument being used to promote streetcars, which will give us 12 miles at $103 million, by the way. And so the Washington Post, just on January 30th, ran this article, Streetcars in D.C., here we go again. Streetcars in D.C. would bring $8 billion in development. So I wanted to take a look at it. I actually looked at their study, and it's exactly what I suspected. It's not transit, it's tax increment financing. Back on the page 66 of their study, it says that the tools necessary to make the transit corridors work is to establish a redevelopment zone with tax increment financing to incentivize. So what does that mean? Well, we could spend the whole day just on the issue of transit and economic development. So I thought to summarize, I would use the digest by Robert Severa of the University of California, Berkeley, Parsons, Brinkerhoff. People, if you're familiar with transit, you know these are advocates for transit. These aren't skeptics. Okay? He did 30 years, he summarized 30 years of research on the very question of urban form and economic development. And his conclusions were urban rail transit rarely creates new growth, but more typically redistributes growth that would already exist. He says that transit investments and services are incapable by themselves of bringing about significant and lasting land use changes. He urges upzoning, which is higher densities, and tax subsidies as the way to truly get development. So my view is if you look at these plans, we're on a path of strategic diminishment. Unaffordable housing, bubbles once the market comes back, family formation will go elsewhere, and minorities will have a tough time getting ahead, and worse congestion. So what should we do? Well, where it works. I'm a fan of the town of Tioga, new urbanist development. It also happens to be situated out in Sprawlsville, something we're not supposed to like very much. And the point is, there's a symbiotic relationship there. Tioga works because people who don't live there can get there, and that therefore people who live there have a better chance of enjoying their quality of life too. So I don't want to say things like the town of Tioga shouldn't be built. They absolutely should be built, but not everything has to be a town of Tioga. We should encourage responsive markets. The research, again, is quite clear. More difficult for house prices to become too disconnected from their fundamental production costs in lightly regulated markets because significant new supply quickly dampens prices. We should defend suburbia. And I know that's what sprawl is. You know, we talk about sprawl. Sprawl is low-density suburban development. And folks, if we're serious about our community, we need to quit trying to beat it up, okay? It's a common phenomenon all around the world, and here's why. Okay, historic home ownership rates. If you look at the urban core of communities, that's your home ownership rate, whether it's 1969, 89, or 2009. Home ownership takes place in the suburbs and in the rural areas. So unless we are just willing to be hostile to home ownership, then we have to have the suburban and rural place to go. Home ownership is not evenly spread. The home ownership among whites is much higher than minorities. And so again, do we want to shut them out of the dream of home ownership because we've declared a war on sprawl? Vital roles of the suburbs. Suburbanization increases housing affordability. Black households more likely to own their own homes. And it says affordability decreases in the presence of more anti-sprawl legislation. So speaking of anti-sprawl, what else is a fatality? Property rights. Property rights are at risk in an anti-sprawl environment. By the way, at 350 pages of Alachua County Comprehensive Plan, not one mention of the word property rights anywhere. Anywhere. So one of the things that this group should advocate is to define property rights and put it into the comprehensive plan. Should be definable, should be defendable, and should be divestable. And then also, let's not ignore the advancement of technology. Currently, this is in Japan, they are developing the zero-emission house. Now, that's not going to be here tomorrow, but again, we're talking a 2035 horizon. Is there any reason to think that someone like G.W. Robinson won't be building zero-emission households in 2035? So if they can, then what's the problem? Well, the problem is transportation. How are we going to get people there? So I'd like to address that. This county needs to advocate the building of significant arterials. There's always this long-standing statement, we can't build our way out of congestion. Well, actually you can. The Selman Crosstown Expressway in Tampa, 3 14-lane miles from Tampa to Brandon, reduced commuting times by 30 minutes, measurable, proving you can build your way out of congestion. It was built in the existing median of a road, elevated reversible lanes. I've been in the engineering room, seen it is amazing. One traffic crash in 5 years. 1 in 5 years, and it was financed 100% with user fees. Didn't cost the taxpayers a dime. Users paid to get it. Vital role mobility. Why do we talk about this? A half-hour commute at the average speed of 30 miles per hour. A person can access 700 square miles for whatever. Not just jobs, but recreation, social, civic, cultural, religious, lots of access. But if you increase that half-hour commute at 42 miles per hour, just a slight increase, you can almost double your opportunity zone. That is why we need to talk about the importance of moving traffic. We're not talking about creating raceways, right? Ron Cunningham of Gainesville Sun thinks, oh, we're just going to drive like 1,000,000 miles an hour. No. We're talking about a modest increase can increase the opportunity zone for people. Benefits of... Damn it. Well, I guess that's telling me my time's up. So I was almost done. Here. Okay, so low-income workers who receive cars, not transit, revealed that they're improved. Plus, we also our own documents are saying we're going to sort of skip over East Gainesville anyway, where a lot of low-income people could probably use it, so we're not even really giving them consideration. So what I would advocate is mobility vouchers, something I discussed in D.C. last year. at a Mobility Choice Conference with Transportation for America and other members of Smart Growth Organization was, instead of spending, $20 million for 2 corridors to pick up 31 riders, why not give those 31 riders mobility vouchers that they can use however they want? If they want to pay for the bus, fine, but they may get a taxi cab, or they may combine it with their limited resources and rent a car for a week. What would be wrong with that? Why would we try to discourage that? Our community could be very progressive and pioneering doing that. No matter where you look, whether it's low-income people, middle-income people, or high-income people, no one sees transit as a true solution. It just doesn't carry the market share to truly do that. Most people will still seek to drive toward their prosperity. And so then also just to look at it real quickly, we have this image of the car as this old clunker that does nothing but spew greenhouse gas emissions. Actually, the cars today, which by the way, the average vehicle on the road is 10.2 years old, but despite that, it still gets more, it has better energy efficiency than light rail, trolley bus, and of course not SUVs. But look at this. With the technologies that are currently online being incorporated, by the year 2035, the car will actually be more energy efficient than any of the rail or transit alternatives. Only the Prius, only the hybrids will beat that. And then, so what can we do? We should right-size the fleet. We should do regulatory tax reform. And finally, we need to encourage replacing the ideology of urban form with the culture of property rights. We get into that later, but basically, we should look to mitigate impacts rather than prohibit uses. And we should, the last thing, why not make every square mile an innovation square? Jerry talked about taking a code from here to there. Why not everywhere? What would be wrong with that? And convert overlay districts into no-zone zones. East Gainesville, it has so many overlay districts, it's suffocating. Why not say, build whatever you want, we'll take it. We'll mitigate, if there are impacts, we'll mitigate them, but we won't prohibit particular use. And that's my presentation. Thanks, folks.